Hello Trust Ambulance family, my name is Nabi and this is a video about how a good acceptable PCR should look like. I am aware that most of us have used Angeltrack before, yet in Trust Ambulance we try to abide by the state's requirements, which will help us in the overall evaluation with the state and will save us plenty of time in processing the PCRs to billing. So I made this call under my name for a patient that does not exist to avoid any HIPAA violation. So the purpose of this video and all the information in it are mainly used for demonstration purposes only. So to start with, this is the call I made. John Doe, he's going from home to dialysis, which is most of our calls currently are dialysis. So most of the calls come to QA like that. When I do QA, I always start with the minimum requirements of for any PCR. So when I look at the vital section, when I noticed that some employees are using this format. The first one is palpated and the second one is taken. Taken is not acceptable. We have to get some numbers, preferably not palpated. So when I go to edit, or the EMT goes to the edit section, everything here in this section should be filled to the best of your knowledge. Like for example, let's start here with numbers. Let's say 120 over 80. Method, choose one, which is most of the time is automated. Heart rate 78. Method, pulse ox or monitor. Pulse rhythm, regular, strong, or whatever applies to the patient's condition. Pulse ox 98. You can press here on the green, it fills it automatically if the patient is not using any oxygen, and here is the breath rate 15 per minute. Blood glucose, it's not required in every call with a stable patient. So you can just simply say, not assigned, or not applied here. Neurology, GCS score, and temperature. Method of taking temperature. And please make sure that the time of the vital or the assessment is taken after transportation started. I noticed some of the employees are not paying attention to the timing, which shows sometimes that the vitals were taken en route, which doesn't make sense. And I have to remind everybody that we share responsibility and we share liability. So as the EMT transporting the patient, taking care of the patient, it doesn't make sense to show that one of the vitals were taken before patient's contact. So you can change by scrolling this dot left and right, and preferably, which is, during transport or at destination. For the assessment section, all sections as well have to be filled. Transfer, no complaint. Some of the employees are leaving this as blank, which doesn't make sense as well. The patient has a complaint. He's going to get some treatment. Otherwise, the patient doesn't need transport. So I would say we use the reason for that transport, which in this case is hemodialysis. I do understand that some of the information are repeated in the follow-up section and in the assessment section. I cannot take the blame for it because I didn't design the system, but we have to abide at the end. So let's say hemodialysis treatment, duration, let's say the patient has been waiting for treatment for 1 day. In the secondary, we try to add more reasons, more details. The more details, the better PCR. Bilateral, aka full risk, history of CVA, right hemiplegia. Anything that applies to the patient's condition. Here, you have the privilege, you have the choice to use the blue arrow if it shows, the blue flash arrow if it shows. That will retrieve the past information that is saved to the patient's file. But in this case, if this is green, you have to get some impression. Is the patient full risk? You can go to mobility, unsteady gait, full risk. Let's say the patient had stroke before, which qualifies him to or her to a stretcher transport, stroke. Neurological and weakness. When it comes to the acute symptoms, we don't expect any acute symptoms unless it happens. So if the patient is stable, we see this patient every other day, and there is no change in the condition, we can say none. For the physical exam, this is not to be left blank. So you can use the blue flash arrow if it exists. Yet, if not, please fill this section with whatever conditions that describes the patient current condition, current status. In this case, I would assume it is amputation and amputation. We make sure that this is after transport. To show you an example, which should be paid attention for, when you do the narrative, is gonna show here if the EMT transporting the patient and doing the PCR doesn't pay attention to the times of the vitals or the assessment. The system, Angeltrack, is designed in a way to expose that, to show that. For example, it's saying that an assessment was performed at 23:23, and between quotations, it's saying prior to EMS patient contact. You don't want that to go to the state. Once you submit to QA, a copy of the PCR goes to the state. They will come back to us and say, hey, how an assessment was performed prior to EMS contact. As I said, we share responsibility, we share liability. So that can be fixed by filling or changing the time to the after transport time. If you do the narrative again, now it's gone. It's not showing that it was taken prior to EMS contact. Of course, always signatures. We shouldn't have a problem with that. If the patient cannot sign, please state why. You have a list of reasons here. If not, just put it here in the comment. Blindness. The follow-up section. I noticed some of the employees are filling the follow-up until here, some of you guys are put in bed confined. It's not enough. Please state why. Don't leave this as none, because the report will go back to you for correction. We need more details. Well, this patient has bilateral, aka history of CVA fall risk. Pay attention to the times and then save. Now you're good to auto-compose the narrative. One other thing I noticed while I was doing the QA was some of the employees are doing or they're auto-composing the narrative before they finish the second vitals or the follow-up section. So it doesn't show, if you do so, it doesn't show all the details that are plugged in every section here. So after you do the vitals assessment, make sure the follow-up is done, signatures, then you can auto-compose and save and send to QA. So this brings us to the end of this video. If you have any question, you can contact your supervisor or you can contact me directly. We are always glad to help.